Okay, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and I will say before we get started is that we're coming up to almost like the end of like the first week into May, and it's kind of surprising really that we could be almost halfway through this year, and there hasn't been a single day I have failed to actually upload any videos at all. So I don't know if it's just for what it is. I think it's just sort of like I'm I'm kind of surprised that I've managed to keep it going this long. But don't worry, guys. I promise you there's going to be more guys we're going to be talking about in the coming months. It's just there is so much to talk about with Chris that apparently there's also considered lost media, which, well, I don't know if that's good or bad at this point. So let's go. Chris's imaginary family. Chris has numerous imaginary family members that exist only in C-197. While Chris has put some real-life counterparts into his imaginary world, this article covers those who have been made up entirely by Chris. This page will not cover Sonichu or the Chaotic Combo, however, since they already have their own pages, and while Sonichu does refer to Chris as father or mama, this is more along the lines of Chris being his benevolent creator rather than an actual family. Like most, if not all of Chris's original characters, pretty much all of them exist purely to worship him or to give him extra powers in the comics. Starting with the Chokian clan leader, or basically Chris's attempts to draw a very weedy looking spoon. The leader of the Chokian clan is a fictional ancestor of Chris, originating from Chris's belief that he is part Cherokee, which was disproven in 2018 after Chris took a 23andMe DNA test. This was during a period of financial crises for Chris, but what can I do? This isn't about that. The character is a Caucasian Aryan man wearing a Roman chest plate Halloween costume, showing how little Chris knew about the people he supposedly descended from. The character looks identical to Chris, who is meant to be his reincarnation. He makes his first appearance in episode 7 of Sonichu issue 2, introducing himself as Chris's ancestor, tells him to kill Crown Graduan, and gives him his Sonichu powers. Fantastic. Crystal Western Chandler, which is meant to be Chris's twin in the comics, but that needs an entire article on its own. So will Paddy Chan. Well, Paddy the dog, but we'll discuss Paddy Chan herself. Paddy Chandler, from the 17th of March 1988 till the 27th of June 2006, was Chris's childhood dog, a Beagle Spitz mix who was put down in 2006, then brought back as a character in Quickville. Paddy grew up with Chris and was the closest thing he had to a sibling. Since his half-brother wanted nothing to do with his family, in a phone call with Clyde Cash, Chris compares the death of Clyde's brother to the death of Paddy, offending Clyde. Chris defended this by stating that Paddy was like a sibling. Chris brought Paddy back to life in Sonichu issue 6 as Paddy Chan, a character created by Megan Schroeder to help Chris cope with the loss of his beloved pet. That's possibly the single nicest thing Megan Schroeder ever did. I'm not even joking. That's actually top notch from Megan. What isn't top notch, however, is how Chris decided to take this, as he usually does, too far, where she somehow gained the ability to walk, talk, and apply for welfare in Quickville. Because no one has to work, apparently, in Quickville, as you can see right here. Sonichus and Rosechus, again, will need quite a lot to talk about as well. Now, Sonichu we have talked about before, like, in extensive detail, but there's things I need to go for. Being Sonichu's creator, Chris is established as a fatherly figure towards Sonichu, and even has his creation call him father in the comics. Despite there being no relation between the two, nor an origin story for how they even met, in real life, whenever Chris is possessed by Sonichu, he refers to himself as Mama, and when redrawing his cover art for Sonichu issue 0 HD, he made Sonichu call him Mother to match his current female pronouns. Unfortunately, this relationship would become much more disturbing later down the line, with Chris performing several sexual acts on him due to the influence of the trolls, most notably the Idea Guys. You probably don't want to see them, but it's going to happen sooner or later because, well, Chris just has to take things too far as usual. Russell and Cynthia. Back in human form, she extracted some of her essence, then in female Sonichu form, she shot her essence up herself. That was a sentence. After that, when she tried to transform back to human, she could not. She was stuck in her Chris-chan Sonichu form. Then between Magi-chan and her examinations at the hospital, she was knocked up for sure. Yes, the beautiful natural act of conception is about as... It couldn't be any more bastardized than what Chris was going for right there. Russell Sonny and Cynthia Rosie are Chris's fictional Sonny and Rosie children. After Chris's Sonichu form became female to correspond with his newfound female identity, he got the notion to use his own semen to impregnate himself, thus conceiving Russell and Cynthia. Miraculously, neither of the twins emerged as hideous mutants, and Chris proudly insists that they're completely autism-free. Hooray! This little experiment behind him, Chris showed them off to Heather Iglesias, claiming to visit them every now and then. They are first seen in Sonichu issue 12, attending the Quickville Pride Festival with their lesbian nanny. On catching sight of Chris, they immediately run up and cling to him, telling him they miss him. Chris gives them a dismissive "ah" before coldly allowing Heather to take them away. Wow. What on earth do you expect? Chris described the conception again in 2012. She did the fang from between her old cock and moving the spunk into her... I mean, I know we've talked about the fact that Chris's ideas of biology are, well, hideous and more based on fan fiction than anything legitimately related to science, but really? And had to stay stuck in Sonichu form until Russell and Cynthia were born for a few weeks. After that, she went back to her human form, and she had to go through the similar quick process that Roberta went through, but the estrogen was coming in quicker with C-chan since her old form was now female. Do you even think Chris even understands what he just said? Because I don't. Reginald Chandler. Alternatively, if I have a boy as well, I would name him Reginald. That was not a dream thing though. I've had a past internet girl pal who would have likely become my girlfriend after she got here from her native land of Australia after finishing college there with a teacher degree. We role-played a family day with the children and she chose the name of Reginald for the boy child. This is, by the way, is Reginald, by the way. Reginald Chandler is Chris's imaginary son and brother to his fictitious daughter Crystal. He pees on the ceiling. He is briefly mentioned in chats with Panda. His origins seemingly begin with Panda Halo and her discussions with Chris about the married life they will have in the future. As for Chris, a single date will inevitably lead to a long and happy marriage. Even if the two don't even like each other. Although Reginald has been mentioned several times in conversation, he is nothing in comparison to his younger sister in Chris's eyes. Reginald has no persona in the comics, except possibly as Reginald Sneasel, and has never appeared to Chris in a dream. Since the untimely death of Panda Halo, Reginald has not been mentioned outside of direct questioning and a recent video, although it is likely that Chris would still name his hypothetical firstborn son Reginald all the same. Reginald was featured in the Playing House video, where Chris pretends Jackie is the mother of his children. This time, he was depicted as the younger brother to Crystal. While Crystal can write in a diary despite being in preschool, Reginald was mitigated to speaking only in baby babble. The only interaction Chris has with him is complaining about cleaning up the mess he made in the bathroom, changing his diaper, mentioning that he threw up several times during dinner, never stopping to wipe him off, apparently, and demanding he stay quiet for the night so he can fuck his wife in peace. It's interesting to note that Chris mentions that Reginald sits in a booster seat, not a high chair. While it's likely Chris doesn't know the difference, it also implies Reginald is big enough to be a toddler. Being a toddler who can only speak in gibberish suggests he inherited a lot from his father. Probably unintentional, but There it is. In April 2019, future message from Crystal Weston Chandler was uploaded to YouTube, purporting to depict a visit from a time-traveling Reginald. Then, of course, there's going to be a larger article on apparently the daughter of Crystal, so we'll get to that when it comes to it. Could Chris actually have a child? No. Moving on. But let's read this anyway. Maybe. Although it would probably require a fair bit of luck, and the kid is likely to come out being that word. Prior to becoming transgender, Chris's chances of conceiving his God-given daughter were extremely slim, but not impossible. It was at least possible for him to impregnate a woman, however unlikely that would have been owing to obesity's effect on fertility, and rather more pressingly, actually finding a willing female companion. However, or a willing female boyfriend-free girl who would want to have a child with Chris. Same thing, really. However, once Chris began using HRT in sessions, Chris destroyed what fertility he once possessed, rendering the odds of actually conceiving a child at near 0%. While he is on the medication, we can't be quite sure if he is taking it regularly or if in the right amounts. In November 2014, after being rejected by a sperm bank, he even went as far as asking a friend to be the vessel which would allow Crystal to enter the world. But as addressed, he is no longer producing potent sperm. A later video showcased that he has actual difficulty in getting an erection in spite of mass debating for 3 straight minutes, which just adds to his list of problems. In Chris's defense, however, he had just pissed all over the floor, and such an event usually makes it a bit harder to get it up. And he was under distress due to the manipulation of the idea guys, who convinced him that they would only stop torturing his imaginary wife if he made them the sex tape. That being said, some later text-based details of ambiguous authenticity during Chris's soul bonding with his mother in 2021 suggest that he has used his penis to have sex with Barb, although Barb was long since infertile at that point. Chris allegedly wore a condom anyway. It's probably for the better though, as the last thing we need in this world are Barb and Chris having zombie children. In September 2020, Chris explained that he still has interest in getting a sexual reassignment operation in the hopes of being able to give birth. Not happening anytime, Chris. I'm sorry, it's just not. Although he seemingly dropped the idea in the following years, wishing to remain with his genitals for some unknown reason. Because he couldn't afford the actual operation, and then he found out that the closest thing he would actually get to actually conceiving children of his own, he would probably want to take that back immediately. Unfortunately for Chris, those who undergo a male-to-female sexual reassignment surgery are incapable of carrying children. I mean, where's the fetus going to kick off? What's Chris going to do? Just keep it in a box? Although some scientists are looking into the possibility of transplanting uteruses into transgender women. That opens up an entire can of worms worth of problems anyway, biologically, but let's keep going. Chris would likely be too old or too unhealthy to bear children in the event of such a breakthrough. And that's all presuming that he could save up enough to pay for that in the first place, which seems like wishful thinking, considering that money seems to be the only thing that Chris can't hoard and he prefers buying Transformers anyway. In short, Chris will die childless, as long as he avoids sinking his finances to the point of foreclosure. The toys that Chris claims to hoard for his future children will go to the state of Virginia if there is no will, and none of his other family members step in. Amen. And haven't just been thrown out by Barb as a result of, prison. Despite Chris trying to hoard again. Should Chris actually have a child? If you are genuinely asking this question, then you really don't know anything about Chris. Parenting is an enormous task that takes huge amounts of effort and competence to pull off correctly. As with Chris himself, even if you have 2 of the most loving parents imaginable, an unhealthy mix of stupidity, coddling, and manipulation can easily turn any child into a monster. First and foremost, Chris is extremely negligent, which is a trait picked up from his parents. Name a thing in his life that he was tasked with taking care of, and you will quickly find that he has left them to rot and rust away. Even with things that he cares about, he doesn't take particularly good care of, and regularly leaves to break because he can't be bothered to take care of anything himself. Children need attention and care, especially during their younger years when they simply cannot take care of themselves. For example, can Chris successfully potty train a child when he cannot do the same thing with his dogs or even himself? Obviously not. This is only exacerbated by the fact that, paradoxically, despite Chris's obsessive desire to be a parent, he has no actual interest in parenting. In the comics, where he is both mother and father to Russell and Cynthia, he has Heather Iglesias take care of them in lieu of showing them any attention himself, with the two children showing obvious signs of parental abandonment. In Playing House, Chris also makes it rather obvious that he actually intends to neglect his children, with Reginald being allowed to wallow in his own filth and vomit, while having not been taught to speak, while Crystal is expected to take care of herself despite being 4 years old. I'll make a video about this privately, discussing this sort of thing, but it's kind of very interesting because I can name other serious concerns. I mean, listen, I'm not a parent myself, but you know what? I think I would have I'd stand a much better chance of actually being a dad myself, probably more than anybody would give me credit for, but I'll explain that when the time comes. Children also cost money, and lots of it. Unfortunately for Chris, Virginia is among the top 10 most expensive states to raise a child in, around 8th place at an annual $23,029 a year. Which means that even if Chris was responsible with his money, didn't have an ungodly amount of debt to pay off, and didn't have a group of exploiters taking a giant chunk out of his monthly payments, his livestream money and his monthly tugboat simply wouldn't be able to cover it. And that's assuming he has no other expenses. Also, not to put too fine a point on it, Chris has virtually no aptitude for self-control and anger management whatsoever. Even if you were to argue that past conflicts have proven he is way too passive to assault anyone physically, one lone case a piece of vehicular assault and use of pepper spray notwithstanding, he'll just as easily settle for verbal outbursts and exaggerated temper tantrums in general, which can be scarring to a child as well. As documented, Chris did have a tendency to lose his temper at the smallest provocation and direct it towards young kids during his time when he went to the game place on weekends, which, among other bad habits, eventually led to the manager banning him permanently. In fact, what prompted such was Chris getting into a heated verbal dispute with a younger card gamer. Top that off with Chris's insistence that everything he does is doing the right thing, even when it's demonstrably unacceptable, and his near inability to empathize with others nor acknowledge his own errors, only attempting to apologize if he thinks he will get something he wants in exchange for doing so, and you'll have a recipe for what would be at best a strained relationship between Chris and his hypothetical children, if not them escaping and preventing further contact with him altogether, as his half-brother Cole did with Bob. And finally, while in the past it would be considered speculation or something to an A-log would say, even regarding some worrying comments on Facebook, nowadays it's obvious that Chris is okay with questionably consensual incest, especially parental incest between a mother and her child. Regarding his previous comments on Facebook regarding incest with one's own child, he was not only accepting over the act, but actually encouraged it, claiming said act was good experience for the child, only adding the condition that the sexual relationship should not be abusive or hurtful, completely disregarding that not only is sex with a child by definition abusive, and by extension hurtful, because children are not able to consent to sex. In short, if by some miracle Chris was actually capable of conceiving children and somehow being allowed to keep them, they would grow up sick, hungry, penniless, neglected, abused, and or dead. Now, I know what you're thinking to yourselves, ladies and gentlemen, that sounds by itself fairly damning and fairly conclusive, and this would be the part of the video where I would say I don't really have anything else to say apart from this. But there is a little something else I wanted to add. First of all, the relationship Chris would have with his hypothetical spouse would be incredibly different, because both of them would now have a lifetime responsibility. Forget Sonichu, Chris's children would be his own legacy from now on. And you've got to wonder about what Chris would do to make his kid's life easier, because it's something I'd imagine any respectable partner would love to see their partner doing, is doing just as much as their share, and to make the roles equal. But Chris doesn't really believe in equality. He believes he is the man while the other is still the baby, which it doesn't really, again, this all plays into the idea about the fact that Chris is just a deadbeat. But the only thing that could be worse in that sort of instance is Chris becoming a deadbeat parent. Now, I will say, again, I'll make a video about this separately, but I was extremely fortunate that I did not have deadbeat parents, that I was raised by very, very kind and very, very charitable people. And you learn quite a lot of things just by using your eyes, I should say. And, well, again, Chris is also a textbook example of, let's thank the heavens above that the best thing that could have possibly happened to Chris is not bringing other kids into this world that would have been at the mercy of somebody like Chris. And with all that being said and done, I hope all of you guys have enjoyed this article on Chris's imaginary family and the imaginary prospects of Chris ever having a family of his own, because of what we know has happened. And I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.